It all began on what was supposed to be a quiet Friday morning. I was enjoying my coffee on the porch, watching the mist lift off my pasture, when I noticed a few unfamiliar tents going up near the fence line. At first, I thought maybe some travelers had lost their way and stopped for the night. But within an hour, more cars started rolling in, trucks, SUVs, even a couple of motorhomes. Music started blaring, people were unloading coolers, and before I knew it, my land looked like the site of a small festival. Confused, I grabbed my hat and headed down to see what was going on. When I reached the crowd, I saw a big handmade banner hanging on my fence. "Welcome to HOA Summer Bash Free Camping." My stomach dropped. My land wasn't part of their HOA, not by a mile. I asked around until I found the organizer, Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president, barking orders like she ran the county. I tried to keep my temper in check as I told her this was private property. She just smiled smugly and said the event was for the community, and that we all benefit from shared spaces. That was when I realized she had absolutely no respect for boundaries, legal or otherwise. I called the sheriff's office, expecting a quick resolution. When the deputy arrived, he shrugged and said it looked like a civil issue. Apparently, trespassing laws get fuzzy when 1,000 loud, drunk people claim to be part of a neighborhood party. I stood there in disbelief, watching strangers set up campfires and stomp over my grass, while Karen strutted around acting like a hero. I could already tell this weekend was going to be a long one, and that if the law wouldn't fix it, I'd have to. By midday, my land looked like a full-blown music festival. There were cars parked on my hayfield, kids running through my pond, and strangers hauling coolers across my yard as if they owned the place. The smell of barbecue smoke mixed with gasoline and spilled beer hung thick in the air. I tried counting the number of tents but gave up after 50. My anger was boiling over, so I grabbed my property deed, tucked it under my arm, and marched straight toward Karen. She stood near the center of the chaos, holding a clipboard like she was managing a parade, laughing with her friends as though this was all perfectly normal. I demanded an explanation. Karen adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and said, "This land is technically part of the community's greenbelt." I nearly laughed in disbelief. "Greenbelt? Lady, this is a working ranch," I shot back, pointing to my grazing sign that had been trampled in the dirt. She went on to ramble about some community expansion clause that supposedly allowed her to use the land temporarily for events. I knew she was bluffing. Still, her tone was so self-assured that even some of her followers nodded along, as if she had some divine right to throw a party on my property. I called my lawyer, who chuckled and said, "Don't touch them, just record everything." So I did. I took photos of every vehicle, every torn-up patch of grass, and every broken fence post. My frustration grew with each click of the camera. By late afternoon, someone had set up speakers near my barn, blasting music loud enough to spook my cattle. When I asked them to turn it down, one of Karen's guests sneered, "Lighten up, old man." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a declaration of war. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, my patience had worn thin. The noise was unbearable, and the smell of smoke from bonfires filled the air. I finally called the sheriff's office again, demanding they send someone down before things got out of hand. About an hour later, 2 deputies pulled up, their headlights cutting through the haze of dust and chaos. I felt a flicker of hope as they stepped out, scanning the scene like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Hundreds of people camped out on private land, music blaring, and tents stretching as far as the eye could see. I guided them to Karen, who was standing near a food truck that had somehow found its way into my pasture. The deputies asked her if she had permission to host this event. She put on her sweetest fake smile and claimed I had agreed verbally to let them use the land for the weekend. My jaw nearly hit the ground. "That's a lie," I snapped, showing them my deed and boundary maps. The deputies exchanged glances, but told me that without proof of damage or violence, there wasn't much they could do immediately. They promised to file a report, but they couldn't exactly evict 1,000 people in one night. Karen smirked at me as the officers walked away, her arms folded triumphantly. "Looks like the law's on my side," she said. I clenched my fists, biting back every angry word that came to mind. One of the deputies, before getting back in his car, leaned in quietly and said, If it's your land, you can use it how you see fit. Maybe graze some livestock. The words stuck in my head like a spark waiting to ignite. As the crowd roared behind me, I started to form a plan. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter, engines, and loud music echoing across the fields. My land looked like a war zone. Trash scattered everywhere, tire marks carved into the soil, and someone had even spray painted HOA Party 2025 on my barn door. I felt a slow burn in my chest as I took in the damage. My bulls were pacing in the upper paddock, snorting restlessly from the constant noise and flashing lights. They didn't like strangers on their territory, and truth be told, neither did I. I leaned against the fence, thinking about what the deputy had said the night before. It's your land, you can use it how you see fit. That sentence kept replaying in my mind. I spent the morning inspecting the fences and making sure my livestock were secure. Most of the gates were still intact, though one section had been carelessly tied open by campers trying to sneak through. I fixed it, reinforced it with new wire, and made mental notes of where I could safely let the herd roam. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone, just remind them that this wasn't a playground. Meanwhile, I put up bright yellow private property signs every few feet along the fence. Within an hour, Karen's crew tore half of them down, laughing and saying they blocked the view. That was the last straw. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Carl, who ran cattle on the adjoining property. He didn't even let me finish explaining before chuckling and saying, "I think I know what you're planning." We went over a few details, making sure everything would be safe and legal. If the HOA wanted to play country games on my land, I'd give them a taste of real ranch life, up close and unforgettable. By Saturday evening, the chaos had reached a level I couldn't believe. The smell of beer and grilled meat hung thick in the air, and the thumping bass of music shook the windows of my house. There were easily over 1,000 people spread across my land now, laughing, shouting, and dancing like they were at a concert. My pasture was torn up, my pond was full of people splashing around, and my cattle had retreated to the far end of the property. When I saw someone climbing onto one of my cows for fun, that was it. My patience evaporated completely. I stormed toward Karen, who was standing near a fire pit surrounded by a group of drunk partygoers. She looked up, clearly annoyed to see me. "You again," she sighed. "We're just having fun." I told her to clear everyone out before I pressed charges for trespassing and destruction of property. She smirked and said, "Go ahead, old man. The police already told you they can't do anything." The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. I turned and walked away without another word, but inside, I was already forming the plan that would end this once and for all. I called Carl again and told him it was time. Together, we prepared the bull's paddock. We reinforced the secondary gates, checked the locks, and installed a simple remote latch, just in case things got out of hand. The bulls were restless, pawing the ground and snorting, irritated by the noise. I made sure they were well fed and calm, ready for what was coming. As the sun set, I sat on my porch, listening to the chaos echo across my land. I set my phone alarm for sunrise and whispered to myself, "Enjoy the party while you can, Karen. Morning's coming." The night dragged on endlessly, filled with shouting, laughter, and the occasional sound of breaking glass. By the time dawn began to stretch across the horizon, I hadn't slept a wink. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll over my property like a curtain before a show. My bulls were already awake, pacing and huffing near the gate, clearly unsettled by all the noise. The crowd, on the other hand, was still going strong. Music blared from speakers, and Karen was standing on a makeshift stage made of pallets, holding a microphone and shouting, "No one can tell us what to do." Her voice carried across the pasture like nails on metal. That was my cue. I grabbed my phone and sent Carl a single text. "Now." From my porch, I had a clear view of the far gate where the bulls were kept. Carl was waiting by the fence, out of sight. When I gave the signal, he triggered the latch, and the gate swung open. 6 massive bulls burst forward, snorting and charging straight into the open field. For a few seconds, no one reacted. People just stared, frozen in confusion. Then one of the bulls let out a deep, angry bellow that echoed through the camp. Panic spread instantly. Someone screamed, "Cows! They're charging!" and the entire crowd erupted into chaos. People dropped drinks, tents collapsed, and cars started spinning their tires trying to escape. Karen's jaw dropped as the bulls thundered past her stage, knocking over tables and sending smoke and food flying. I leaned against my porch railing, watching the madness unfold. No one was hurt, but the sight of hundreds of people running, screaming, and tripping over coolers was almost poetic. Justice had finally arrived, on four hooves and pure muscle. Within minutes, the entire field transformed from a noisy festival into pure chaos. People sprinted in every direction, screaming and stumbling as the bulls charged through the open pasture. Coolers, folding chairs, and tents were abandoned mid-run. Cars tried to peel out of the muddy grass, spinning tires and throwing dirt everywhere. One guy dove headfirst into his car window while another tripped over a lawn chair, scrambling to get up before a bull came within 10 feet of him. It was complete pandemonium, but a beautiful kind of justice all the same. Karen, in her bright red blazer and sun hat, was in the middle of it all, waving her arms and shouting for everyone to stay calm. The problem was no one was listening. One of the bulls snorted, lowered its head, and trotted toward the food tent, sending her shrieking and running for cover. She slipped in a puddle, landing flat on her back as her clipboard went flying. I stood near my gate, arms crossed, trying hard not to laugh. The bulls weren't attacking anyone. They were simply exploring, curious and annoyed by all the noise and movement. They knocked over a few tables, stomped through the trash, and scared off the last of the trespassers. Within 10 minutes, my land was almost empty. Cars fled down the dirt road in a frantic line, honking and fishtailing as they left behind a trail of abandoned camping gear. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in days. My bulls slowed down, snorting triumphantly as they wandered back toward the upper pasture. I walked across the field, surveying the mess, until I found Karen standing near her car, covered in mud and shaking. I handed her a trespass notice and said evenly, "Next time, Karen, ask before you throw a party on someone else's land." By noon the next day, videos of the stampede had spread like wildfire across social media. Clips showed the crowd screaming as the bulls charged through the field, tents flying through the air, and people scrambling to escape. The captions were ruthless, HOA gone wild, Karen versus bulls, and my personal favorite, the Great HOA Stampede. News crews started showing up at the edge of my property, laughing as they filmed the aftermath. Trampled grass, abandoned grills, and Karen's muddy high heels still lying near the fence. What had been a local nuisance was now a national joke. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. She tried to spin the story, claiming the bulls had escaped and endangered innocent families. But the videos told the truth. You could clearly see her ignoring my warnings, smirking while I showed her the property lines, and then yelling, "He can't stop us." Moments before the bulls appeared, the sheriff called me personally later that afternoon. His tone was amused. "Well," he said, "I guess nature handled the eviction for you." He told me no charges would be filed against me since everything had happened on my land and no one was injured. Meanwhile, the HOA board was in shambles. Members were furious that Karen had dragged their name into a public embarrassment. They held an emergency meeting that same evening, where half the board resigned, saying they wanted nothing to do with her leadership anymore. Reporters camped outside her home, and someone even started selling t-shirts online that said asterisk, "Run like Karen's bulls are behind you." Asterisk. I stood by my fence, watching as cleanup crews hauled off the debris. The land was scarred, but it was mine again. I couldn't help but smile at how poetic it all felt. Karen wanted to humiliate me, but instead, she'd made herself infamous. The following week, I thought the chaos had finally settled, but Karen wasn't done yet. Determined to save face, she filed a lawsuit against me for public endangerment and emotional distress. When I got the notice in the mail, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. My lawyer, Frank, chuckled too when he read through her claims. "She's reaching," he said, "and she's about to regret it." We countersued immediately for trespassing, property damage, and defamation. I had hundreds of photos, hours of video footage, and the viral clips from social media backing my case. Every piece of evidence showed the same thing. She'd organized an unauthorized event on land she didn't own, and ignored repeated warnings to leave. When the court date came, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, eager to witness the showdown. Karen strutted in like she was still queen of the HOA, wearing her usual bright red blazer. Though her confidence faltered when the judge asked for her legal basis to host an event on private property. She mumbled something about community rights, and the judge raised an eyebrow. Then Frank played the viral video of her yelling, "He can't stop us," before the bulls appeared. The entire courtroom burst into laughter. Even the judge had to cover a smile. It didn't take long for the decision. The judge dismissed her lawsuit entirely and ordered her HOA to pay for all damages, legal fees, and property restoration, totaling just over $40,000. Karen's face turned pale when she realized she'd not only lost, but had bankrupted her own association in the process. Reporters swarmed her outside the courthouse, but she refused to answer. As for me, I walked out grinning, shaking hands with the deputies who'd once said, "It's your land, use it how you see fit." It felt good to finally have justice stamped in ink. A few quiet weeks passed after the court victory, and life slowly returned to normal. The grass began to grow back, the fences were repaired, and the pasture once again looked like the peaceful land I had always loved. My bulls grazed lazily under the morning sun, oblivious to the fame they'd gained online. I still got the occasional message from strangers thanking me for giving the HOA a taste of their own arrogance. It was funny how something so stressful had turned into a legend. Around town, people had nicknamed me the Bull Man, and I couldn't walk into the feed store without someone asking for the full story. Karen, on the other hand, had vanished from the public eye. Rumor had it she'd resigned from the HOA presidency and quietly sold her house. Some said she'd moved to a gated community 2 towns over, one with strict no livestock rules, which made me chuckle every time I thought about it. The HOA she once ruled so proudly eventually dissolved, unable to recover from the scandal or the financial fallout. What was once a group obsessed with control had been completely undone by their own hubris. One evening, I decided to put up a new sign at the edge of my property. It read, "Private land, trespassers will be introduced to the herd." It wasn't a threat, just a friendly reminder written with a bit of humor and history behind it. When I looked out over the peaceful field, I felt a deep satisfaction settle in my chest. The land was mine again, quiet and respected. No more parties, no more noise, just the wind, the cattle, and the sweet sound of solitude. Some people learn through conversation. Others, like Karen, learn through stampedes.